Kellen Moore told us about major offensive line changes, his OTA philosophy, and gave an injury update. Kind of think that's the three biggest things that we learned in his press conference following the first week of work for the New Orleans Saints. I'm Tim, and let's talk Saints. So I think the news that everybody was kind of talking about the most, although I think it may be slightly less important than the second thing we're going to talk about, is apparently we know with the Saints offensive line, at least what they want to start with, where everybody's at. No, no way set in stone. I think we could easily say that. But for right now, Banks at left tackle, Penning at left guard, McCoy, of course, at center, and Ruiz at right guard. I think we knew that all along. Those two were going to be there, and Fuaga at right tackle. That was the media was able yesterday to attend a portion of the practice, and that was already getting popped out on Twitter that's where those five were working. So prior to he even showing up at the press conference and speaking to the media, that was out there. I'm pretty sure he knew he was going to get asked about it, and he got asked in a couple of different spots in a couple of different ways. So you to get the full effect, you'd have to watch the whole video. But when he specifically talked about most of the stuff we're going to talk about, it was pretty much a 2.5 minute conversation from about the 8 minute mark to about the 10.5 minute mark. The move from Penning, I don't think it was unexpected that they were going to try him at left guard, and I don't think it was necessarily unexpected that Banks would be a left tackle or Fuaga at right tackle. So thought maybe they would possibly leave Fuaga where he was at last year at left and start Banks at the right tackle. But one of the things that very early in this conversation Moore talked about was that he's got no concerns between a left tackle and a right tackle. He mentions that in the modern NFL, edge rushers go wherever, and that's normally who the tackle's dealing with. You know, they kind of follow the matchups, is what he said. So they're no longer that clear cut defined. This is a left tackle in the NFL, and this is a right tackle in the NFL because I'm gonna paraphrase something that John Benton said about a year ago, the great offensive line coach, and I'm not being sarcastic. Benton has become a legend. He was here last year. Media about a year ago doing the offseason work got a hold of him, and he answered quite a few questions on the offensive line. I did a video on it, and I'll try to find it in the archives and post it up here somewhere. But he basically said the same thing. And paraphrasing his comment, his defenses got smart. If your best pass blocker was on the at left tackle, they weren't always inclined to put their best pass rusher opposite of them the whole game. So, well, let's go try the other side. And he gets a little more specific. That's why I'll remember post the link. But he wasn't being a maverick at this point and throwing something new out there. This is an idea and a concept that's been kind of out there for a little while, but I think a lot of fans and media just hadn't quite caught on at the end. The whole entire NFL, at any rate, doesn't necessarily always look at it that way. He even mentioned that two of the best tackles in the league are Penei Sewell and Lane Johnson, who are both right tackles. And you really can't argue that. And was there ever a thought to move him to the left, or the teams just go, hell, leave him at right? We're good there. We'll scheme around whatever we need to scheme around, whatever the defense is scheming for, trying to get edge rushers as they're moving them around. So it was almost like a feeling, and I think he said it in this way. It's almost made out to be a bigger deal than it really is. And again, that's kind of echoing what John Benton said about a year ago. And he mentioned that, look, in this group, when you're talking about the offensive line, it's got to be connected. You got to have continuity. He talks about the fact that it's both verbal and nonverbal. He's as opposed to a left tackle and a right tackle. What he talked about was, he's thinking it's more important a left tackle and a left guard, both verbally and non-verbally. He said so many different combo blocks that come in blocking schemes, so much stuff coming at them. That's more important than necessarily who's playing what side. He even mentioned that when they brought it up to Fuaga, hey, we're going to start you on the right side at right tackle, and I think his direct response was cool. It's like he didn't seemingly have a problem with it any more than he had a problem with when they tried him at left tackle last year. So I think all along a lot of people thought this is probably the way that they were going to look to go because while I don't disagree with the Benton or Kellen Moore philosophy on this, I also kind of have to acknowledge that there's a comfort level. I'm sure that Fuaga's always been a right tackle and Banks has always been a left tackle, and they're both young players. I mean, Fuaga is battle tested. You know, he won every game as a rookie. Banks is battle tested probably as well as you can battle test a college player, basically being a 3 year playing dang near every snap at left tackle for Texas the last 3 seasons. So I don't think you worry a whole lot, but being comfortable, being familiar probably goes a long way. My opinion on that, but I think in the long run is he talks about got to put the best players where they're going to be the best chance to help you win games. And I mean, I don't think anybody can disagree with that. There was also talk several times is at the 5 minute and 50-second mark is when it first came up about Trevor Penning, but it comes up several times about making the move to guard. And even reference last year with the Eagles, something very similar happened. Mekhi Becton, in a lot of ways, was kind of a Trevor Penning. He's a first round pick by the Jets. He was going to play tackle, struggled, didn't work out like they wanted. He finds himself on the Eagles last year. And I didn't know this. I knew they moved him to guard and it worked out really, really well for him. But he even brought up we're moving Penning at the beginning of the process. He said in Becton's case, it was much later in the offseason before we came up with that plan, and he did a good job moving. Nussmeier, Moore, a little experience with moving that tackle to guard because they were both there last year in Philly when it happened. He also talked about, and this was asked a couple of different ways, a couple of different times by the media, but about, look, all the injuries and not having continuity and having to shuffle the line. And he acknowledged that happens in the NFL. So even though you're talking about continuity and keeping these guys in these spots, and you know, specifically, like he was saying, that simpatico relationship between a left tackle and a left guard and a right tackle and a right guard about what the defense is throwing at them and how they're going to handle it. It's the NFL, baby. Guys get hurt, guys go down, stuff happens, and you do have to do the shuffle. So he did say it's important to recognize that can happen and probably will. It's almost unavoidable at some point in the season, and also having these guys prepared to do that. So I always felt offensive line could be the strong point of the offense. And now it kind of has to be. And I feel like it's in pretty good hands so far with how they're looking at it, how they're trying to form it. Um, Look, they still have to go out and run block and protect whoever's going to play quarterback and not commit stupid penalties and especially not commit one of the things that we just could not seem to get out of our own way the last couple of seasons is the pre-snap penalties offensive line calls to really put our offense in a hole. And I think some of that's going to be addressed with the stuff we're talking about in the second segment. But for the most part, I just kind of like the feel and vibe about what they're trying to do. And I don't, like I said, I don't think it's anything maverick or brand new in the NFL. I think it's been going on for a while about look, don't emphasize so much on the left tackle, right tackle thing. Don't, get caught up so much in as he said, a deal that isn't as big as you think it is. But at the same time, I think they clearly acknowledge that if a player has to be comfortable and that gives you the best chance to put the best player in the best spot to help your team win, then they recognize, well, we may have to do that anyway. I'm confidence building. I try not to drink the Kool-Aid. I keep walking the fine line in this offseason of wanting to be hopeful, but being realistic at the same time. But if we got any chance to be competitive and do anything we want to do this offseason, it's starting in the offensive line. And even though I said this may not be quite as important as the kind of what he talked about in the off-season program, it ain't that far away either, in my opinion. And a lot of people's opinion, it's probably more important. And hey, I get that too. But hopeful and optimistic, if they can get this to work, it's going to go a long way to help exceed the expectations that, quite frankly, I'm sitting there going, I don't even know if we can play above 500 ball this year over 17 games. Get this to work out, you could. We'll say this also, if you can get this to work out. Oldest player on this offensive line, if you can get this unit to play at a high level and start becoming the anchor you need it to be, Kawhi 29. Everybody else is in a other four players are in their more or less their prime years, except for the two young guys who are both first round picks. You're trying to build that offensive line around in the future at left tackle and right tackle. Like, this could be the thing if you can get this to work in the first year that can speed up the rebuild process and catapult the Saints to hell where we want to be, where they want to be, where we're trying to go. So I think to me the most important thing is he kind of gave an off-season breakdown. It's kind of quick, but he references parts of it in indirectly or directly in other parts of the press conference. But he basically talks about it. It kind of comes in three components, so to speak.
Yeah, there's a lot of performance stuff. I mean, I think really when you look at the offseason program, you start with the weight room and the sports performance side of it. You know, that's a big building block and a foundation for us. The second component is just really building on the scheme component. Building their understanding of the schemes at more of a basic level, and we'll build it as we go. And then the third component is just seeing these guys spend time around each other as you're building an environment, a culture. And, that's the exciting part when you see these guys just spend a lot of time. We got an awesome facility here, first class. It's got everything you can possibly ever need. And so it's fun seeing these guys here just lingering around, taking advantage of the training room, taking advantage of the cafeteria, which is, best in the world. And so, it's really fun to just see these guys really embrace this thing, embrace each other, and come together for this thing.
And I mean, he hit all three of the high points there. He's talking about the weight room, sports performance. And he mentioned him several times. He made it a point to say that Ted Rath is one of the best in the NFL because Ted Rath is heading all that up, new hire, and how important it is. And I think I don't know if this was intentional or not. We haven't gotten enough of Kellen Moore to really, if we want to attempt to kind of get into his head of what he's thinking or trying to do. But whether it was intentional or not, this does kind of say, hey, look, and like I said, he specifically said Ted Rath is the best in the business at the sports performance end of it, and that's what he's running. He's in charge of. Um, the preventable injuries and the ability once players are injured to get them back on the field 100% healthy in manner that seems to be more consistent with other NFL teams, which we were not very good at. And to me, I think we were terrible at it the last few years. But even before that, even the previous regime, coaching regime, Sean Payton, those guys, there were times and stretches and seasons over the last decade or so where I had the same thought of how is the same injuries keep happening? How is it taking them forever to get back on the field when you look around? And if you're play fantasy football, that's really one of the typical because then you're kind of following injury reports week to week around teams and noticing things like, man, there's four players that I know of that had the exact same strain that our guy had. They missed 2 weeks. He missed half the season. There was just we can always bring up the Delvin Bro fiasco when he was here. So to me, this seems like, look, without throwing shade like I just kind of did, going, look, we know it was a problem. We went and found the best guy we could find, and he said the best guy you could get, come in and start kind of fixing some of these problems up. And he's talking about the weight room and the sports performance, but he gets a little in depth because, and there was a couple follow-up questions on this, but specifically, he's talking about they're concentrating on the efficiency and the workloads. So what he's saying, or what he said was, look, getting the most out of the limited hours. And that's a key concept I sometimes forget about this, is that more and more as NFLPA and the NFL and the collective bargaining process goes on and on. I'm 54 years old, so I can remember when OTAs and off-season stuff was a hell of a lot longer and far more intense than it is now. So, I mean, rightfully or wrongfully so, that's the way it was. And it's kind of got whittled down how much time they can spend with the players, how much they can actually do. And so the focus, getting the most efficient workload out of them, the most work done that's going to be beneficial to what you need to do in this period of OTAs in the off season, while keeping players healthy. There's a novel concept that I'm not so sure we even thought about the last couple of years. We'll find out. Because like I said, it was horrendous last year. And I keep pointing out that we got an interim coach that decided they needed an activation period, which was basically a stretching or a warm up type period before practicing games. A lot of the injury concerns we had, especially soft tissue and leg injuries, kind of seemed to go away. Kind of like the concept of before we even do anything, weight room and acknowledging this and trying to get, if you have 4 hours to practice, trying to get the maximum out of that 4 hours, the most effort you can get those players to put on the field without, I don't think you can eliminate, that would be just being insane, but minimizing potential injuries of stuff that you can avoid, basically based on the weight room, the conditioning, the sports science, the Ted Rath run stuff. Almost like Ted Rath may be one of the most important members of this staff, and technically he's not a coach. Just saying. So I also talked about scheme, and this kind of goes into it. They have a limited amount of time to work during these processes. And he said even less like classroom type stuff in OTAs than opposed to the regular season. And he didn't say, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm thinking that's probably the trade-off. They get them on the field a little more in this offseason program than they do in the season. It was another thing Darren Rizzi mentioned last year about when he was implementing changes, and he made some, but and I didn't even know this, that they were limited a number of times, and it wasn't many. I forget how many practices he said over the course of the season, once the season starts, when they could even put them in pads and not be in shells. It was a surprisingly low number. So understanding that this scheme right now, they've got to get the basic schemes in. Now, it's one of the drawbacks of a whole new coaching staff and all that, because as he says in the press conference, you got to get them up and running at the basic level as fast as you can, but you can't leave them behind, basically. I'm paraphrasing what he was talking about. And once you get them there, then you can start adding to it. And this kind of runs into conjunction with the first part, because you're trying to be efficient with your workloads and getting the most out of them with a limited number of hours. Kind of doing the same thing when you're talking about this end of it, the classroom. He mentioned that a couple of times. He kept calling it the classroom when they're in the classroom, but also how you translate that on the field, which he did say that. So it definitely not an easy process, but I heard him talk more about the process of how they're trying to do this in this press conference that I felt like the previous head coach said in almost 3 years. I feel like I understand more what they're trying to do right now as opposed to spending 2.5 years trying to figure out what the hell they were doing and wondering if they even had a process. More on that later. Third part, and he didn't constant talk about it, any of these necessarily all that much. And this is really the only thing that I could really pull when he says building environment and culture. And the first thing I focused on was building, not the BS we've been hearing the last couple of years of maintaining, that roll it back philosophy, that's dead and gone just by building. The word building, I hope he chose it consciously, or even if it was subconsciously, because it's on his mind constantly. The environment, the culture had gotten so eroded over the last couple of seasons. And again, this erosion started, it predates the Dennis Allen era. Sean got some things to answer to on this too. But at this point, it doesn't matter who's to blame. It's all about fixing it. At least he's acknowledging that. Talking about almost for lack of to put it under one word, like the camaraderie, a team camaraderie, two words, trying to keep them in the building, doing that. That's why he's mentioned the awesome facilities. He kind of threw in the awesome cafeteria. And I'm like, yeah, the nutrition side of it. But I'm also thinking, going, could it just be like the old hang out in the cafeteria when you're not doing anything and the break room, so to speak, almost. I don't know. But I feel like he's acknowledging, yes, a lot of work to do in that area. And in a way, and again, I don't know what his intent or non-intent or anything is, but I keep thinking to the whispered rumors we had that, and I'm going to say deeply in my opinion were true, but nobody ever really had any concrete evidence. Bam, there it is. Where was some really huge cracks and fissures in that locker room over the last couple of seasons. In my opinion, the only reason why I truly believe, I don't know how bad it was or which players were involved, could probably give you some educated guesses, but watching what was going on the field at games, especially live, when you get a really good look at sidelines, going, we know what it looked like when things were good, and what we were seeing and kind of hearing didn't sound the same through our kind of glory years. Again, my opinion. I can't prove it. I could be 100% wrong. I'm probably at least partially wrong on some of this, but I think I'm partially right. Then there's a recognition that if that was true, he knows it's building. Implication being there's nothing left previously that you can carry over, or so little. It's not you're repairing it, you're building it. I felt like that's been needed for a while, and I'm kind of happy to hear the acknowledgement on it. What I take from this is, oh God, I hope this is the last time I ever have to say this phrase, because I think he's concentrating on the process to get the desired result. He's mentioned very similar things indirectly. He kind of, especially in this part, was kind of references. But there was several times in the offseason when he talked, and he talked about the process, and he made the connection several times. Look, it's a result-based business. Eventually, you got to get the results. But his point being is, if you don't get the process right, and he even goes into a little more detail this when he starts talking about, kind of the way the quarterbacks were working through these 3 days. Concentrating on the process to I have to paraphrase, but I think I'm correct in this paraphrasing. Concentrating on the process to get the desired results, which I think should replace giving Mickey the benefit of the doubt, but I'm still not sure if he deserves it on this. But it's a much better way of phrasing Mickey's dumb statements that he made. Cat Terrell did an excellent little tweet a while back, a couple months ago, like just finding instances going all the way back to when he was first hired of his crazy statement. You got to looking past the results, some variation of that. We look past the results. In a result orientated business, you cannot look past the results. But what you can do is concentrate on the process, knowing if we get this right up front, then we give ourselves a chance to get the desired results. But if we don't, we're never going to get there. I think he acknowledges Kellen Moore perfectly in this little, and I played you the whole clip when he was talking about this. This is all process based stuff. It's about health. It's about mentally learning the scheme and being able, even when he was talking about the offensive line, the verbal and nonverbal that needs between a left guard and a left tackle to get the job done, all process stuff. And that was a clear example because getting the verbal and nonverbal that they need to be able to block, there's the result. What's the process? Getting them there. I think all good coaches, in some way, shape, or form, whatever cliche or phrase they want to use to describe it, that's what they're talking about. If you don't get this stuff right now, and I mean both in the sense of this instant right now, and right now in the chance this is the period and the opportunity you have to make the building blocks of the process that you're going to rely on training camp and then once the season starts. Because tying this all the way back to what Darren Brizzi said, once the season starts, you're just running out of time to be able to make wholesale changes that may be able to affect your team and get done what you want done. And even if you're going to try and you need that to work, that's a result. It still goes back to the process. But he came out, dropped some injury nuggets, and I think although it's not a lot, they right now I think they're all kind of relevant. Uh, Let us know the two veterans, Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau, both with knee problems. They're not participating at this time. Um, was asked about Taysom Hill later on, paraphrasing that because they're like, "What was the expectations involved in the offense?" And he acknowledged, "Hey, man, great football player, does so much, helps us." Yeah, and it sounds like he wants definitely, maybe even expects Taysom to be part of the offense at some point this season, but they not really drop in a timeline. Didn't really go into is he in the rehab process right now or conditioning or whatever. So no real information and almost nothing on Foster Moreau, which to me, this is a key point, acknowledging and keeping an eye on what happens with these two, because, and we'll get to Dallin Holker in a bit, we're running out of tight ends, at least right now. We don't have a lot. You got Johnson, you got the rookie, Mataval, Jacobson, a few other holdovers from last year. Um, we don't have a fullback still on our roster, and the expectation is, well, you're not going to see much 21 personnel out of this team unless a tight end is H back or somehow handling the fullback role, which Jake Stahl, our new tight end, the blocking guy from Philly, may have a portion in that. But you're probably looking at a lot of 11, 12 personnel mostly. Caught up on Jake Hayner, which you probably know by now, hurt his oblique. Wednesday after practice is what I read, throwing after. We'll come back to him in a second because acknowledge Quincy Riley. We knew was rehabbing from an offseason procedure, and hopefully we'll get him back. But he didn't really give a timeline on that one either. And Dallin Holker, I don't even know, he is just not participating. I don't catch what's going on with him. But again, figuring a lot of 12 formations, 12 personnel, and you figure he's got an opportunity to build on his undrafted status from last year, but he needs to be at practice. Same for Jake Hayner. This just kind of sucks for him because it sounds like he may not be back till training camp, but we'll see. That came up several times, and according to Moore, that this is not necessarily hurting his ability to, to make the team, much less try to make it win the starting job. So he didn't think it was going to hurt it too much. Did acknowledge that these guys, they're all able to participate in the classroom portion, and like we talked about in the last segment, that is a big chunk of it. So he's getting that. But Kellen Moore did admit when he was asked about a veteran option, a veteran quarterback option, and for right now they are keeping that open. Yeah, I think Hayner is just a bit of bad luck, and the likelihood of a veteran showing up probably dependent on somebody not showing a bevy of guys who all play quarterback in the NFL and the coaching staff that are going to be evaluating this, sending them the message, no, he's not going to be able to do it. That would be the case where somebody gets cut and you might see a veteran coming in. But this puts Hayner behind the eight ball, um, I think. So I think they won't close the door to veteran option right now. Uh, but I still don't think you may see anything before training camp unless it comes down to a rep problem, say around mini camp or whatever, where the young guys are getting too much because you want to, our Ted Rath working on the efficiency versus the workload to keep everybody healthy. So if there's an interference in that, then yeah, maybe you see Ben DiNucci come back. Who knows? But that's kind of where we're sitting on the injury report. All in all, not nearly as bad as anything we were talking about last year. And hopefully it stays that way because, like I said, Ted Rath may be one of the most important additions, if not the most important addition we added to the staff that isn't actually the head coach or one of the coordinators. So, first time here, you like what you saw, I'm going to give you the spiel. Please go ahead, hit the subscribe, make sure you hit notification. So that way, when something drops and we're cutting videos, you'll be aware of it. Everybody, do me a favor. Been seeing on some of the channels that I follow some mentions of, because the other thing is, please hit the subscribe. That helps the algorithm out. Some mention of, and this happens occasionally in an unsubscribe, where just the YouTube glitch, because I know they do updates and stuff like that, and I've had it happen to me, and it just flips off, and you go back and you hit subscribe to get it back. So double check that. Um, but the newest one that I saw was some people who were trying to give thumbs up, but it wouldn't register. I have not seen that personally. I don't know how true it is, but if you notice that, please leave me in the comments um, and let me know about it so I can maybe send something to the YouTube help desk going, hey, wait a minute, I got some people trying to like, and they button ain't working for them. So that's why I bring it up. And of course, if you hit the like, that does feed the algorithm. So 4-day weekend coming up. The Saints are off till after Memorial Day. Then OTAs kick back up. And I think a lot of us are also in the same boat. Hey, we're taking 3-4 day weekend here. So everybody enjoy yourself. Be safe. I'll have something coming out sometime Monday. So after the festivities are over, you'll have a video to watch. Might be something on one of our running backs. Um, so be on the lookout for that. And until I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.